Hello, welcome to the Wednesday, August 16th, 2023 Court of Revision meeting for the Bamberg Creek, Jananna, and Koch-Leis Municipal Drain 2023. My name is Chad Curtis. I'm the Deputy Clerk with the Township of Wilmot. I will serve as chair of this meeting until we appoint a chair in the next motion. So I will now read the recommendation that the Court of Revision for Bamberg Creek, Jananna, and Koch-Leis Municipal Drain 2023 convenes at 5:30 p.m. on August 16th, 2023. They have a mover and seconder. Moved by Councillor Cressman, seconded by Councillor Wilkinson. Is that Carrie? So now the next item on the agenda is a motion to appoint a chair. Would anyone like to nominate someone to be chair?
I would move that Chris Wilkinson act as chair.
Do we have a seconder? We have a vote? Passes. So Councillor Wilkinson, you are now the chair of this meeting.
I accept. The purpose of the Court of Revision is to hear appeals regarding the schedule of assessment only. The Court of Revision has no authority to change the engineer's report in any way. The schedule of assessment may be altered, but the total must remain the same. If one assessment is reduced, then other assessments must be increased to bring balance. So the Court of Revision will hear appeals from the following appellants who have filed appeals by the statutory deadline of 10 days before the Court of Revision, dated today, June 12th. No, pardon me, that's an incorrect. Let's scratch that. August 6th. So the Court of Revision will hear appeals from the following appellants who filed appeals by the statutory deadline of 10 days before the Court of Revision, dated August 6, 2023. So the filed written appeals within the statutory deadline were from Peter and Dagmar Schneider, Ken and Kathy Heinz, Ladislaus Bauer, Justin and Natalie Miller, also known as Ridgway, Corey Kittle, and Oleg Borisov. Is there any other appeals? That's all. Okay. Okay. So, I suppose we will call our first appellant, which will be. Oh. The court can, if approved by the members, hear appeals from other assessed landowners present who did not file a written appeal within the statutory deadline. So with that said, are there any other assessed landowners who wish to appeal their assessment? Anybody else present? If I didn't call your name? No? Okay. So there are none. Number 6 now. Okay. Okay. So we are going to receive an explanation of the assessments by the engineer. So Mr. Stephen Brickman, drainage engineer, please provide the information on the assessments of this drain. Following that, we will then move on to the presentations by the appellants. Mr. Brickman. Thank you.
So thank you for the introduction, and it was a good introduction. So we are focusing on the assessment components only, or the cost sharing or cost distribution. There's nothing, like you mentioned before, nothing about contents of the report or bottom line costs. So what we're going to be focusing on the most, if we refer to the report, roughly in the middle of the report, there's several pages, 11 by 17, like larger size pages that are folded over. This is what you're going to be referencing for the bulk of this hearing. These are the assessment schedules under Schedule C. It's 4 pages long. 3 of those pages are on white paper, and then the 4th page is on yellow. The yellow page is just a summary of the 3 pages that come prior to that. And then there's also Schedule D, which is the assessment for future maintenance as well. Those are the only focus that we can have in this hearing tonight. I did prepare a notes package. So as the chair mentioned, we can only assess out the costs, the bottom line cost of the project. That's the estimated project cost is $462,900, and that number can't change. And if we refer to those assessment schedules, you'll see on the yellow page at the bottom of the page where it says total assessment, you'll see that number, $462,900. The assessment is divvied up into 4 different branches. So one being the Bamberg Creek, another being the Jananna East branch, another being the Jananna West branch, and then the Koch-Leis Drain as well. Bamberg Creek makes up 44% of the cost of the project. The Jananna East makes up 23%, the Jananna West 20%, and the Koch-Leis Drain makes up 13%. And some of getting into the how the assessment was actually done. What we have to follow is it's referred to and it's noted in the report, but it's called the TOGM method, which is the accepted method in Ontario for assessing out costs. And there's a few key principles that go along with that method. One of the number one key principle, you're always assessing the property and not the landowner. There's a distinction between the landowner and the property. So one thing that may come up is if one landowner is very well off, that cannot be factored into how much assessment they get, and vice versa. If they're not in a good situation, it just can't be factored in. So always the focus is on the land or on the property, not on the landowner. A second key point is that assessments are not absolute. They are relative. They are relative to all the other properties in the system. So the method of assessment that we use, and I refer to it as the TOGM method, and I've got a bit of a breakdown of how we go through that. The first thing that we do is we separate the project into logical intervals, and then we assess out each interval independently of the others. So that's step one. Step two is separate out any special benefits or special assessment items. In this case, there is no special assessment item, but those would be things like if you had a road crossing, you can pull those costs aside and assess them directly to the roads, and then everything else would be baseline divvied up between everybody who's liable. Like I mentioned, there is no special assessment in this case, but there is a few special benefit assessments, and those are to reflect. That tool of assessment was used to assess out crossing considerations. There's a few areas that have some severed off pieces of land, and that was the tool that was used to separate those items out. So what's left, once you take off your specials, you have your total costs, you deduct your specials, what you're left with is kind of your baseline normal drainage type project costs, and those are divvied up between benefit and outlet liability. So the next step then is to divvy those up, and then the next step after that is to determine what those benefits are and which lands are receiving benefit too. And then to distribute the benefit assessment relative to other properties. The next after that would be the distribution of the outlet liability using a TOGM method as well. And I refer to it as adjusted areas, but basically what you do in that case, and I'll move into it in a minute here, is you look at the area that's within the watershed and you give it different factors based on cover type, like surface properties and entry point and that sort of thing. The last thing that we do is we check for fairness. So we review the assessment from many different perspectives. It can be sliced in a lot of different ways. We look at it from as many different ways as we can. We also seek out multiple opinions too, professional opinions, I mean. It isn't done just by one person. It's independently done by more than one person. And then from there, we seek out feedback. So we present these assessments to the public too and receive input as well. Moving right into those schedules there. We have several different tools that I kind of mentioned already, but one of them was special benefit, the other was outlet liability, and the other being benefit assessment. Benefit assessment on the entire project makes up 49% of the job. Outlet liability makes up 29%. And special benefit represents 22%. A common question is what's the ratio between benefit and outlet? So once you pull the specials aside and you look at what's left, that ratio in this case is 62%. and that's a very common number for a setting just like this. I'm going to move into the appeals and describe how we actually worked out the assessments that are there for them. So the first one on the list was the Schneider appeal. The Schneider appeal can be found on the first page of the assessments on the Bamberg Creek. It's the third line down. It can also be found on the Koch-Leis assessment, which is on the third page. So there's none on the second page, but there's another entry on the third page for the Koch-Leis, and it's the very top line in that case. So I'm going to explain how those two assessments were done. The first part is benefit assessment. So benefit is defined in the Act, and it means the advantages to any lands, roads, buildings, or other structures from the construction, improvement, repair, or maintenance of a drainage work, such as will result in higher market value or increased crop production or improved appearance or better control of surface or subsurface waters, or any other advantages relating to the betterment of lands, roads, buildings, or other structures. In this case, the assessment to the Bamberg Creek for benefit is $12,500, and that's broken down into two different kind of considerations. So one is based on area consideration. It's referencing things like higher market value, potential for increased crop production, and better control of surface waters. And that amount was calculated to be $10,652. And then we have another category of benefit assessment being length, like kind of a length consideration relating to better control of surface waters. And that number comes to 1,848. That combines to the 12,500, which is the number that you will see on that first page in the benefit column for that property. The next entry in that line there is the outlet liability, and the Drainage Act provides a basis of assessment for how outlet liability is to be calculated, and that's in Section 23.3 of the Drainage Act. And so it says it here. So the assessment for outlet liability and injury liability provided for under subsections 1 and 2 shall be based upon the volume and rate of flow of the water artificially caused to flow upon the injured lands or roads or into the drainage works from the lands and roads liable for such assessment. So it's based on volume and rate of flow. And the way we do that, and I mentioned this before, but it's a Todgham method. I referred to it as the adjusted areas method. What we do is we look at that property. We look at the first factor being the area that's within the watershed. The second factor being what that area is being used for, whether it's a low runoff area, like for instance a bush, or whether it's agriculture, which tends to be our benchmark entry, or whether it's a high runoff area like a road or something like that. And then so that's the second factor. And then the third factor is length factor or point of entry. How much of the system is being used by that area? In the case of the Bamberg Creek, I'm going to break this down in a bit of detail, but the equation that we have here is for determining outlet liability is the adjusted area for that property divided by the adjusted area for everyone else. That's your relative component. You have to do it relative to other properties. And then you take that ratio and you multiply it by the total outlet liability for that segment of drain. In this case, the adjusted area calculates, for the Schneider property calculates, there's 0.58 hectares entering at entry point 0.56, which is the entry point where the Koch-Leis enters the system. So it enters at the Koch-Leis point. It's given it's treated as, like this portion, this 0.58 hectares, is treated as bushland, so it was significantly reduced. Then we have another part that's 1.79 hectares. It enters roughly at the halfway point of the Bamberg Creek, and it's agricultural land use. There's 5.72 hectares entering at the Koch-Leis entry point as well, and that's the agricultural component entering there. And then there's 0.63 hectares, which actually enters at 0.0, so it's actually doesn't have any assessment at all. And then there's 0.31 hectares entering at roughly the halfway point, and that was given a bit of a built-up factor because there is some buildings and that sort of thing in and around the area. That area, that 9.3 hectares, which is listed in the assessment schedule, is then treated as 4.9 hectares once you work through that calculation. So you take that 4.9, you divide it by, you got to do that same exercise for everyone else in the watershed. So you divide that, in the liable watershed, I need to say too, you divide that by everyone else there, and then multiply it by the amount, and you'll get the amount, the outlet liability amount being $48,900, which is the total outlet for that system, and that comes to $1,933. The net estimated expense is shown on that first page over on the extreme right side of the page there, and it's highlighted in a kind of a green colored highlight. And that net estimated expense is made up of the benefit assessment plus the outlet liability, less any government grants, less any allowances, In this case, that's the benefit assessment is $12,500 plus $1,933 for the outlet liability calculation, less the grant of $4,811, and then less allowances of $4,030. The net estimated expense is $5,592, which represents, the total assessment represents 7% of the Bamberg Creek. The Koch-Leis Drain, that property is assessed $6,317 in benefit, and area is almost half and half. So area component was $3,200 roughly, and $3,100 for length consideration for those benefits. I'm not going to go through the outlet liability calculation again because it's basically the same areas, but the entry points are adjusted relative to the Koch-Leis and not to the Bamberg Creek. And in that case, instead, that 6.3 hectares is treated more like 4.9 hectares. Instead, it gets reduced, and its ratio relative to everyone else, and then multiplied by the outlet liability, comes out to $272. The net estimated expense for that property would be the $6,317 for the benefit plus the $272 less the grants. There's also a special benefit to that property too. That was that component for that crossing consideration there of $10,800. Anyway, so you take those three numbers, the benefit, the outlet liability, and the special benefit, and then deduct off the grant, and then deduct off the allowances. The net estimated expense to the Koch-Leis property is $447 for that property. The Heinz appeal is the next one that I have on my list. And it can be found, there's an entry on the Bamberg Creek. It's the third line from the bottom. It's from the top, it's 1, 2, 3. I think it's 7 entries from the top. Yeah. And and it's also found on the Koch-Leis Drain, which is on page 3. And there is no benefit assessment to this property for the Bamberg Creek, so there's nothing to go over there. But the adjusted area, that area, which is 6.2 hectares in the watershed, it gets treated more like 2.6 hectares after it gets factored down for entry point and for land use. So that 2.6 relative to the liable area in the watershed, multiplied by the entire amount for outlet liability, comes out to $1,030, which is the entry you'll see in the assessment schedule. And the net estimated expense for that property, there is no benefit, so it's just the $1,030 less the grants, and that comes out to $687 net estimated expense, which represents about 0.5% of the entire Bamberg Creek project. The Bamberg Creek component, that's it. The Koch-Leis system, there's one entry as well for that property. There is no benefit assessment, but there is an outlet liability assessment. That area, that 6.2 hectares, gets treated as 2.57 after you split it up and do the factoring for it. Relative to the rest of the system, its calculation would then come out to $202 in terms of for outlet liability. And then after grants are deducted of $67, it's $135 net estimated expense for the Koch-Leis Drain, which represents 0.3% of the Koch-Leis project. The Bauer property is located in Wellesley Township. It's north of Gerber Road. And it can be found on the Bamberg Creek assessment schedule. It's the third line, so the assessment schedules are set up so that the top of the page is the Wilmot Township information, and then the bottom of the page is the Wellesley Township information. And so this is found in the third line entry in the Wellesley section. And then it's also found on the Jananna West branch. It's the top entry in the Wellesley portion of that assessment schedule, which is on page 2 of the assessment schedules. So the Bauer property, there was no benefit assessment to Bamberg Creek because it was just so far away. But there is an outlet liability calculation. And so those 8.45 hectares that's in the watershed are treated more like 2.15 after you factor. And I do need to take a second to explain this factor. So there was 0.98 hectares that was entering at the Koch-Leis entry point. It was treated as bush, but then again, it was deducted because there's sand material for it as well. So it was treated almost at the rate of a half a bush instead. So there was a further reduction for that area. There's 0.03 hectares entering at the Koch-Leis entry point into the Bamberg Creek. It's a residential land use, but it was cut in half because of the sand properties as well. And then there's a 7.44 area, which is agricultural land use. It's sandy as well. It was cut in half for that area too. So that's why those 8.45 hectares gets reduced so significantly down to 2.15. So relative to everyone else, and then multiplied by the outlet liability, that outlet liability comes to $848 for that property for the Bamberg Creek. That $848 represents 0.4% of the cost in Bamberg Creek. And after grants are included, the net estimated expense is $565. The Bauer property is also involved on the west branch, and it's much more significantly involved here. So there is no benefit to that property as well. The drain actually doesn't come up to the property. It stops on the other side of the road. But, of course, there is a outlet liability associated with it. The same properties, it went through the exact same exercise, treating for the sand as well. And because it enters at the top of the system, it's using the entire length. And so 8.45 hectares gets treated more like 3.84 hectares. And then relative to everyone else and multiplied by the outlet liability, that calculation comes down to $9,395. The property makes up about 34% of the watershed area for that west branch, and it's assessed 28%. So it makes up 38% of the watershed, or 34% of the watershed. It's assessed 28% in terms of outlet liability. And it makes up 34% of the watershed. It's assessed 10% of the total costs, that $9,395. There's grants available to that property as well. The net estimated expense to that property would be $6,263. The property is also involved on the Koch-Leis Drain. Its outlet liability, following the same process, its outlet liability comes out to $302. Again, the sand was factored as well. And after grants, it would be $201, representing 0.5% of the Koch-Leis system. The Ridgeway or the Miller property is next. It's also on the Wellesley side of Gerber Line. And it can be found on the Bamberg Creek. It's the first entry in the Wellesley portion. Under Natalie Ridgeway is what it's named as. And the Jananna East branch, it's the first entry in the Wellesley portion in that system as well. There is no benefit assessment to that property, but there is the outlet liability following the same process. And just like the Bauer property too, 7.98 hectares was treated at entry point into Bamberg Creek. It enters at the top of the system. And it was treated as agricultural land use with a sand factor as well of reducing it in half, basically. So that 7.98 is treated more like 3.99 hectares. And that calculation then, after making it relative to everyone else, comes out to $1,571 for outlet liability. And after net assessments, it comes out to net estimated expense after grants, comes out to $1,047 net estimated expense. The total assessment represents 8% of the Bamberg Creek work. The Jananna East branch, it was factored in the same fashion. It enters very low on the Jananna East branch. It enters down at roughly the bottom third of the system, so it doesn't use the entire system like it did on the Bamberg Creek. But the Jananna East, it does enter lower, so that same 7.98 hectares is treated more like 1.44 hectares roughly. And then that equates, after doing the math on relative to the other properties, that comes out to $5,529 for outlet liability. There's a grant on that as well. So $3,686 is the net estimated expense, and the total assessment relative to the Jananna East branch represents 5%. The Kittle property is in Wilmot Township, and it's on the east side of the watershed, and it can be found on the Bamberg Creek assessment schedule, page 1, and also on the east branch, which is page 2. It's the top entry of the east branch. There is a benefit assessment to this property of $18,241. The area component makes up that entire assessment. I'm focusing on Bamberg Creek. So the area component makes up that entire assessment because there is no length of Bamberg Creek where we're doing work. It's only, we're outletting at that point. There's no additional length upstream. So the only consideration represents area considerations. The outlet liability is calculated in the same way as before. There was a component of this property which is receiving a sandy soil kind of factor, and the remaining, the lower portion of the property is more regular type soil properties. So that 13.84 hectares gets treated as 11.1 hectares, and then comparing it to other properties and going through the outlet calculation, it comes out to $4,374 in outlet liability. So those two numbers, the benefit plus the outlet, 18,241 plus the outlet of 4,374 minus or deduct off the grants, 7,538, and then there is some allowances for Bamberg Creek as well. That net estimated expense comes down to 14,537. The total assessment represents about 11% of the cost of the Bamberg Creek work. The Jananna East branch, there is a $9,000, $278 benefit assessment to that, and that was not based on, it was almost a flip from before. It was not so much based on area considerations, it was based on better control of surface water, the length consideration. The reason that there's no area consideration is because the tile outlets that would be on that property would outlet into Bamberg Creek. So that was factored down just for length considerations. The property which has 13.84 hectares entering it at some point, is treated more like 4.5 hectares. And relative to everyone else, that calculation for outlet liability comes out to $17,478 for a net estimated expense after grants and after allowances for that property too of $10,797. The total estimated cost, the total assessment for that property represents 26% of that component of the system. And then the last entry I have here is the Borisov appeal. It's the very first entry on page 1, and there is a benefit assessment to that one of $5,503. The area consideration makes up the bulk of that at $4,965, almost $5,000 right there, and then the remaining $500 or $538 is for a small length consideration. And the outlet liability, that 8.54 hectares, is it's agricultural land. It enters lower on it enters at just upstream of the Koch-Leis system. So those 8.5 hectares get treated more like 5.98 hectares, and relative to everyone else on the Bamberg Creek, that comes out to $2,354 in outlet liability assessment. So the benefit assessment, $5,500, plus the outlet, $2,354, less grants, and then there's also an allowance, a couple allowances as well for that property too, of $3,040. The net estimated expense to that property is $2,198. The total assessment represents 4% of the Bamberg Creek drain. So that's an explanation of how those assessments were actually calculated using the Tajam method, and all the calculations that basically went into making it relative to everyone else. So that, I think, on referencing the agenda, I think that completes item number 6. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we'll proceed forward to presentation by each individual appellant. We'll start with item 7.1, which is a presentation by Peter and Dagmar Schneider.
Good evening, Council. So in reference to the Bamberg Creek, when looking at, as mentioned, the Drainage Act, Section 22, that states lands, roads, buildings, utilities, and other structures that are increased in value or are made easily maintainable or maintained as a result of the construction, improvement, maintenance, or repair of a drainage works may be assessed for benefit. So all the farmable land on Peter and Dagmar Schneider's property is already being farmed. It's been farmed for 50 years with no issues with water, surface water, drainage, or anything else. So my understanding that there would be and I understood a little bit of what the gentleman from the Headway Engineering had explained, that it's a ratio, but there is no benefit to Peter and Dagmar Schneider in relation to the Bamberg Creek drainage change to the drain. So we feel that the assessment of $12,500 of benefit is completely unreasonable and should not fall on the shoulders of Peter and Dagmar Schneider and their property. That should be, as you mentioned earlier, that the cost can't change and it needs to be moved to somewhere else or shared somewhere else. As the main benefactor and the person who started this would be the Jananna Corporation, the expectation is that full value would be transferred to them as a cost, as they are the only ones that are financially benefiting from my perspective, and at least from the perspective of the land that Peter and Schneider have. So that is the main point. I'm not allowed to dispute the amount of hectare with the 9.3 being called out in the report. The gentleman did explain how that was kind of broken out, with most of the land being 3 to 6 meters above the drainage level. It seems very unreasonable that that land would be affected if we had a flood that was 3 to 6 meters higher than the current water level that exists. Then we're going to have a significant different problem, and I suspect that the drain is not going to help with that massive flooding in Ontario if we're going to have that kind of water sitting in our province. So that is the first one in relation to the Bamberg Creek portion of the assessment. The Koch-Leis Drain section, again, I believe that the section and the calculation of the 6.3 hectares is significantly higher than what is possible or what would be affected. Again, all that land along that drain is being farmed currently with no issue, and has been for, again, the 50 years that my parents have lived at that property. So I don't understand why that would also, again, be included, that 6.3 hectares. That is a huge piece of land that is likely not, as shown in the image that I provided in the report, or in my, whatever you call this, in my letter. You can see that there's just a tiny little corner of the property that is even close to within 1 meter of the top level, according to the topographical map in the report. And that is significantly less than 6.3 hectares. So that maintenance, the overall cost of that is not significant. And as it is part of, or goes through Peter and Dagmar's land, I can understand the $447 cost. You said that we can't factor in the financial situation of the owners, so I will not speak further to that.
Members of the committee, are there any questions at all? Seeing none? Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Moving to presentation 7.2, Ken and Kathy Heinz.
I wanted to say that a lot of my land drains across Peter Snyder's to get to the Koch-Leis Drain. And there's no tile in Peter Snyder's, so it all has to run above ground. And there's a berm along the creek that was put there. They dug that creek twice now and piled the ground onto the creek bank. And so the water can't even get into the creek. So we're paying for something that we can't even use. I actually combined my rye the other day on Peter Snyder's land, and nothing grows along the creek because the water can't get away. So my water goes there, doesn't get in. Peter Snyder's water can't get in, and we're supposed to pay for something that doesn't drain away, and they're only going to make it worse. The big problem was the beaver, and I brought this up over and over again, that the beaver has built a dam. They dug the creek the second time because of the beaver and didn't get rid of the beaver, and now they're digging it again. I've gotten rid of the beaver. I got rid of the beaver dam. The Bamberg Creek flows perfectly. I lived there 35 years. I've watched that creek. There's no problem with the flow. The Koch-Leis Drain the first time they dug it was good, it needed to go down. The second time was a waste of money, and now this third time, another waste of money. And why we're paying for something that's been done the third time and incorrectly, that we have to fix ourselves, I don't feel that it's necessary to pay again. So it's really frustrating, and it doesn't seem to get heard, and nothing gets done. So that's my feedback. And I'm not paying a lot, and it's not the fact that I'm paying a lot, it's the fact that the job isn't being done properly. And they call themselves engineers, and to me, water, when it can't get into the creek, they're wanting to drain 1 acre behind at this cost and not thinking about everything else they're doing, which is not correct. So,
Committee members, any questions? Yep.
When was it that you took the beaver dam out?
they had the initial meeting at the township, and they showed all the pictures with the stream wasn't flowing, and it was after that that I took the beaver out.
So do you know, like, roughly a month and a year, or
It would have been,
spring or fall of what year? Or?
it was in the spring. So, yeah, they took them in the fall, I guess, the pictures, so, and showed that the stream wasn't flowing. And I had a hunter come in, and he took out 2 beavers, and then we took out the dam. And then there was also a couple culverts that were in there that were slowing down the water, and those have been taken out too, so the Bamberg Creek is flowing perfectly fine now. So it's not needed. Now, even putting concrete culverts up the side of this farm, like, why can't they put like a 6-inch big old perforated, that's a drain, that's a smaller tile that can go into the creek, and you don't have to dig the creek down. Like, to me, it's a way overkill for 1 acre when the farm is already systematically tiled. Like, a big O will do a job, it takes in water. Concrete is an enclosed system, it doesn't take in water. So, to me, it's way, way overkill. It doesn't need to be done like this. And they could reduce the cost by way more, like it just, it's way overrated. So,
Any remaining questions?
That's it.
Okay. I will remind the group, I appreciate your comments, Mr. Hines, but I will just remind the group we are here only to discuss the assessments, not anything related to the design that has been determined by the engineers. Thank you. Moving forward to 7.3, presentation by Ladislaus Bauer. Welcome to Wilmot.
Hi, good evening. My name's Teresa Bauer. I'm Ladislaus's daughter. He was not able to be here tonight. And I have to say, I wasn't even aware that he was expected to speak at this, other than the letter that we submitted.
That's fine. We've heard the letter. Do you have anything to add or want to speak?
Well, just to give some reference, we have lived across from the Garn family for, it'll be 50 years in November. And again, I think my dad's position here is that there's not really any benefit to my parents' property. I mean, the Bamberg Creek, as he explained, is the closest entry point, I guess, or closest point that their property is to the creek is approximately almost a kilometer down the road where it crosses Notre Dame. And the other part, I suppose, is the Jananna shed that they're talking about. But again, he's not seeing how there's a culvert there that we know is at the base of the, by the field there, but there's never ever been a drop of water in it. And again, it's been farmed happily and successfully for 50-plus years now, and there's never been a problem with it. So, again, I think his position is the benefit. What possible benefit could there be to their property, given the cost that's being assessed? So, again, as per the letter, he was just asking that the cost be moved somewhere else to those that are actually benefiting from this or are having the work done.
Any questions from the committee? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Moving forward, 7.4, so presentation by Justin and Natalie Miller, or Ridgway. So Natalie Ridgway, are you here? Where's this? Okay. Okay. Not seeing Natalie or Justin in attendance. So moving forward, it'll be 7.5, presentation by Corey Kittle.
Okay, and we're back. This will be my third trip to the podium here. Sorry, I have just some pictures and visuals and all that good stuff, so I'm just going to ask to bring that up. No. What's that? It's a brand new, I just bought it. Well, how can I get it to you? Well, I did ask prior to the meeting if I could get some media or...
So we can pause for just one moment. Let me just have a quick chat here. I do need a motion to just amend the schedule. We got a mover, seconder, vote. That's carried. Okay, so the motion that we've basically put forward here is that we're moving the schedule and bringing Corey Kittle's item 7.5 down to 7.6 and moving Oleg Borisova up. In the meantime, we'll give Mr. Kittle a moment to get the file sent over to us, and we'll reconvene on that in a moment. So moving to then new item 7.5, presentation by Oleg Borisova, please.
Thank you. So I won't take a lot of your time, and I'm basically trying to reiterate the point brought up by Peter Schneider, that as for his property, for my property, is the same issue, because the area which is affected is around 8 hectares, which is a considerable part of my property, and it is farmed, and I have absolutely no issue with the water drainage. And as a matter of fact, for the past 10 years, I started to have issue with water retention. All right. So I just wanted kind of to mention again that as Peter Schneider noted, that he has no issue with water drainage on his property. I have the same statement against my property. So I have 8 hectares affected, according to the report. Not the whole area is farmed, but most of it is. And I can say that over the past 10 years, I started to see the issue with water retention, not the water drainage. So it is absolutely impossible to realize those benefits that I have here put against my property, which is $5,000, $5,503. So I will have to think what else I need to do in order to improve water retention. And that is not mentioned in any way here. That's a real issue. So my property is located across the so on the other side of the Bamberg Creek. And on that side, as I hear, there are no issues with water drainage. So as engineers could not provide any additional details in terms of what are the real numbers, in terms of what are we going to expect with respect to the water drainage, I have to conclude only that whatever the method is used, it is an issue here in this report. Because as I hear that other folks also saying that there is no problem with water drainage. But anyway, I want to kind of to point again that this issue of $5,503 of benefits that I can possibly have because of that work is absolutely impossible to realize. Thank you.
Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, thank you. Just pause for a brief moment here while I get caught up regarding procedure. Okay, what we're going to do, just to give Mr. Kittle a few moments to get himself sorted out, we will move into a 5-minute recess. If you'd like to use the facilities or wander about, we'll reconvene at 6:20. We'll call it 6:24 p.m. Approximately in and around that time, we'll reconvene quickly. We'll give Mr. Kittle a few moments to get the presentation over to us. So as of this moment, we are in recess.
Should I email it to you? Or
Reconvening at 6:24 here out of recess. Just to update everyone, we have received the presentation from Mr. Kittle, so we will proceed forward with the revised presentation schedule. So the revised presentation schedule has Mr. Corey Kittle at 7.6. Please do give us your presentation. And I know you'll have a little bit longer. I'll give you a quick heads up at about 10 minutes and we'll see where you're at, okay? And then we can go from there. Okay. And thank you, Candace and Chad, for getting the IT sorted out on that one. And committee members, I've just emailed you the link to it as well in case you do wish to pull it up. It should be coming momentarily.
Yeah, sorry, I thought I'd asked about bringing a presentation. So anyway, I get it, that's fine, no problem. So listen, I know we're not changing the cost of this thing. I just hope today we're here to talk about who's paying for this thing and a little bit about fairness as well. You know, listening to the presentation so far, there's just a lot of talk about benefit. I think we're definitely overusing that word. This is basically a project someone wanted, went through the drainage act to get it, and now it's a big cost. And now it's about divvying up those costs. There's little to no evidence of a benefit to anyone. Visually, data-wise, it's a lot of cost. So my first slide really is just some context as a reminder. I know we've had a few presentations already. These are important because we're here to discuss those things, right? And so one of the really important things is like nobody asked for this, okay? Nobody sees the benefit of the work being proposed. I think that's already been conveyed very clearly. There's a very clear consensus of that. You know, obviously the petitioners do, but everyone else obviously does not. You know, the collected visual evidence over time shows insignificant impacts to farmland and production. So the important point is this, but certainly nothing that justifies the cost and unnecessary disturbance. Is it worth it? I think that's the big question. The plans put forward include input from nobody. I really want to stress that point because I think there's some misinformation here about gathering inputs and using those inputs to come to this plan and this decision. I think that's highly inaccurate. There was a non-attended on-site meeting. Yes, the petitioners were there. There was maybe one other landowner, but other than that, nobody knew about it. Nobody got notices in time. There was absolutely nobody at that meeting. A lack of follow-up, involvement, ignored requests to participate. So me, myself, my own personal experience, I guess I find myself to be one of the biggest financiers of this whole project. I've been thrown into this thing. I was expecting at least some courtesy to get involved, give some input. Maybe there's some obvious things we can uncover and some quick and easy solutions. I have an email chain of basically ignored emails. Hi, Stephen, thanks for taking the time to talk about this issue with me. Side note, there was a phone discussion. I was talked or told I would be a participant in the process. Continuing on, I find myself missing many of the details. Here are my main questions. What are the problems we're trying to solve? What's the cost-benefit analysis? Is the work and expense worth it? Who's it benefiting and to what benefit? And my last point here was, hey, perhaps there are simple solutions that are being overlooked. At one point a year or two ago, John Kunze hired excavators at our creek trying to solve some big flow issues, big expenses that at the end of the day made no difference. The problem was sticks. There was a buildup that occurred at our bridge of sticks that just needed a little bit of TLC. Sometimes people miss the obvious things right in front of them. That was my first email, October 25th, 2021. November 8th, 2021. Hey, just checking back just to make sure you got this. Let me know, thanks, and so on and so forth. I finally got a response via email September 22nd, 2022. Absolutely no involvement, no engagement up until that point. Still no involvement, no engagement. Hi, I'm still looking for answers to the below questions for the record. I never did hear back from anyone on this. I will say the information to date has been limited to basically non-existent. I've been tracking this parcel for close to a year now and have recorded drone footage that does not indicate any issues. So that was basically a year of non-response and no participation. Finally, September 22nd, 2022, I got an email back. Thanks for your email. These questions, and this is the response I got. These questions and questions like it are exactly what we intend to address at next week's public meeting. That was it. Game over. The public meeting was the presentation of all the costs, all the plans, all the detail. It was done. The work had been done with absolutely no involvement from me and absolutely no involvement from anyone else. I know because I asked everyone. So in terms of input and collecting, feedback and really it being an engaging, involved process, that is the furthest thing from the truth. Sorry, I don't think that's fair. So anyway, yeah, I can go on and on and on. I'm not going to get into this here, trust me, but this project is based on an invalid petition. The Jananna West Branch is being constructed without authority. Happy to get into those details. Next slide. So the main issues are the East Branch running north. So this is on my fence line. We're calling this the East Branch running north up to my pond. So when you look at the east side, again, just want to make sure everyone's getting it. You got that low basin on the south of that fence line, and then you have my pond and a branch running up there, okay? So I'm talking about the branch running north to that pond. It no longer serves a purpose and therefore provides no benefit. I'll get into that. The East Branch at the lower basin will do nothing to remove water from my field and serves no benefit to me. The system is a closed one, providing no additional benefits to nearby lands, meaning like it's a closed system. Water goes in, it's the same amount of water goes out. It doesn't, you can get perforated tiles that collect water and serve a benefit to neighboring lands. This does not do that. I would like to learn how I'm being compensated for all the water that's flowing onto my property from Jananna's property. That's not being discussed at all. One of my main topics, and it's not just related to Jananna, but others, it's the loss of access allowance. And so I'm bringing this to light because these allowances, people are paying for these allowances. So my question is, what access did they lose that wasn't already lost prior to this project? Because there's some concerns about, today, there's no access to some of these parcels. So why are they being compensated when there's not a change in access? So that doesn't really make any sense to me, and I haven't seen any answers that answer that question. There's no explanation as to why Section 32 of the Act was not an option here, and I'll get into that in a second. There's no mention of flow rates or volumes to justify the need for today's standards. What are we pumping out? What is the problem? How much volume of water do we need to be showing to abide by today's standards? Maybe we don't need today's standards. Maybe there's a trickle of water that is the problem. The Bamberg Creek assessments are a bit of a mystery. There's really no explanation in the report. I've got no response on my inquiries to that. Anyway, moving on. Section 32, why I'm bringing this to light. And again, this is kind of all about fairness and other options we had at the time. So Section 32 is a great section because it provides the engineer the ability to scale down a project, not expand a project. If a project is deemed to have an outlet that is insufficient, which is really the case that's being made here, we're hearing that Bamberg Creek is insufficient. So that's what we're hearing, and that's why this project has exploded in cost the way it has. Well, did you know that compensation can be paid for an insufficient outlet? And it's provided on a one-time only basis. So when an engineer discovers, this outlet isn't really going to work, and maybe we shouldn't be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on it, the engineer can say, you know what, here's what we're going to do, landowners. We're going to compensate you. We're going to give you the money. And, that's an option I have in the Drainage Act. And so be it. So So instead of paying $104,800 for the east branch, and instead of paying $203,400 for the creek excavation, this project could have been resolved for $25,600. Or at the top, if you go to my next slide, this is most recent land data here, valuations for Waterloo Region. You know, at the top, we're $35,700. Why? Why was that not an option, right? Nobody wants this project. It costs way too much. There's no benefits proven, no evidence given. This could have been resolved for $35,700, according to Section 32 in the Act. How come we didn't do that? It's there for a reason, when there's an insufficient outlet, which is the case for this project. Moving on. So let's just talk about that branch.
One moment, Mr. Kittle, we're at 10 minutes. If the committee is okay with it, we'll allow Mr. Kittle, I don't know, an additional 10 to finish up his presentation. Okay, perfect.
So just looking at that branch. I think I'm warming up to that for sure. I got some great pictures and visuals. So if you go to the next slide, really this is about fairness and who should be paying for this, right? Because we're paying it. We're just here to decide who's paying what. Like, isn't this kind of what matters? Like, what's the impact on yield, on crop, on production? You know, all the pictures I've seen, everything I've taken, there's no large, obvious degrading or loss of farmable land. You can see the sprayer tracks, everything's moving through, everything's being farmed. You go to the next slide. This is along that fence line again, going up to the pond and down to that low basin. You know, it looks consistent, it looks fairly good. Next slide. So I'm moving along here. So really, you know, there's this proposed drain going up to my pond. And in talking with the engineer, yeah, that's because of the pond. I asked that question, is this because of the pond? I was told it was. So if you look at sort of the damage it's doing or the loss of land, it's mostly on my property. Like, it's my problem that's affecting me. There's very little in terms of inconvenience or loss or damage. You know, you have a few areas of growth along the fence line, but nothing that, you know, would, you know, suggest we need a $500,000 project. So next slide. So this is kind of, this is all visual evidence. Like, this is pictures I took August. You know, this is all brand new stuff. You know, there is a little bit of a washout, you know, from the pond water. I'll get into that. You can see that there's a little bit of a swale, a washout. Nothing I would consider, you know, exorbitant, you know, massively destructive. It's actually all still being farmed. The tractors move through it. They grow over it. It's not being farmed. And actually, you know, Jananna did a smart thing, and they, you know, or maybe the drainage person that did the work, they put a drain there. So there is a drain there that actually is doing its job. So is anything new really redundant? Should we be paying for that? Next slide. So, you know, so this drainage branch was added by the engineer to significantly deal with a small amount of runoff from the pond. And I'm confirming that. The issue is the pond. The first problem is that I, who just recently moved here, was never made aware of the pond problem. Not from Jananna, not from the drainage superintendent, not from the engineer. No one ever talked to me personally about this. Not during the entire process did anyone think to discuss with the pond owner. It came to light during the first public meeting. That's when the plans and costs had already been dictated. How is someone supposed to fix a problem when they're not even aware of the problem? Shouldn't the pond owner be given the opportunity and time to fix the problem? That's about fairness. The second problem is that this branch is kind of a Band-Aid solution. It's there to hopefully gather that surface water. Maybe the water will get there, maybe it won't. It's there to hopefully collect it. Anything could happen to change that directory of that water. You're never guaranteed that that runoff is going to end up at that drain. So for the massive expense this will occur, any kind of Band-Aid is what I call this, is a poor attempt at a solution. The third major red flag is that there's already new systematic tiling in the field and a drain in this exact spot that the engineer is proposing, another new drain. This information is nowhere to be found in the report, and that's a vital piece of missing information. The fourth problem is that the proposed drain is very over-engineered and oversized for the overflow of water that's coming from that pond. It will run dry for as long as time exists. The fifth issue, here's an important issue, is that I have since fixed the real problem, the pond problem. And if anyone cared to talk with me, meet with me, included me in the process, and I did invite the petitioners to come with me, take a look. I do have a plan. I could have showed them the real problem. So that problem's been resolved. It's no longer an issue. Next slide. Instead of spending money on a Band-Aid overpriced redundant drain, the best and only real solution is to fix the problem. I can't stress that enough. In this case, that's some pond overflow. Upon learning about the problem, I took the immediate and necessary steps to call in surveyors, drainage designers, installers to rectify the problem. This includes pond reinforcement, pond infill, and a completely new overflow runoff drain that solves all the East Branch up to my pond drainage problems. Any water runoff has already been diverted to the pond owner's property exclusively. The benefits are a better performing solution, one that fixes the problem, doesn't Band-Aid it, faster installation, the work's done, I'll show you in a second, and a no-brainer with no downside. It's a pragmatic, common-sense solution. This project needs more of that. Anyway, next slide. So this was the problem. This was the problem, okay? This is a problem I inherited, but I committed to fixing when I found out about it, okay? At some point in time, the overflow stopped working, could have been clogged, who knows, and it created some erosion on the bank going to the Jananna property. So the overflow set too high, and because of the erosion, there's this small loss of water that gets through the bank, through the root system of the trees. You can hear it, you can see it. If anyone cared to join me, I could have showed it to them. So I brought in the real solution. I hired a company. Next slide. We did the work. We got the work done. We brought in triaxles and triaxles of heavy clay. We built up the banks. Next slide. So you can see here where the problem was, top left-hand corner. The red line indicates where the bank used to reside at a very lower elevation. So the green line is the new supremely reinforced heavy clay thickening of that bank wall. We have nice high banks. We have thick banks. We installed a new outlet that comes exclusively over to my property. And something that the pond didn't have and should have had is kind of an emergency backup drain in case there's issues. It has a secondary overflow that also flows onto my property. Solution, problem solved. Next slide. So you can see here, I actually have a low spot on the opposite side of the Jananna field beside the pond. It's almost like a bowl. It's an unfarmable piece of land, never farmed it ever, because it's low-lying. And that's where actually a working field tile exists. So that water is being diverted over into that field tile and completely has a trajectory and a geography that takes it down to the creek. And it's working because there's sort of clean outs along the way and you can see the water running through it. Next slide. So there you have it. We fixed the problem. Their drain will run dry. This new drain will be bone dry. It'll be the biggest, driest drain known to man. Next slide. I'm moving along here. That's my total cost. That's what I spent to get the problem done, to the penny. So I fixed the problem because nobody wanted to talk to me about the problem or include me into the solution. So I took it upon myself. This total, I feel, should be removed for the amount I owe, because this is a real solution that fixes the problem. It's not a Band-Aid. I made it clear to the petitioners that I was going to fix the problem and the pond issues. Anything above and beyond that they want to proceed with, they can pay for it. Okay? My assessment, my outlet liability should not now be $17,480. That needs to be removed or significantly reduced. The only issue that remains is Jananna's water flowing onto my property, which I'll show you here in a second. Next slide. We're moving through here real quick. Lower basin. Okay, next. Again, just visual reference. This is what we're talking about. It's pretty dry. Like, it really doesn't get wet only in, like, you know, that melting period. Next slide. Looks pretty good. You can see a little bit of underperforming yield, but nothing I would say that suggests we spend $500,000 here. Next slide. Okay, now this is really important here because you can see the trajectory of the proposed new drain and where the catch basins exist. The important point here is that my property is the lowest point in this basin. Okay, you can see it. You can just go there and you can see it. Okay, the other thing that provides me evidence is water. Water doesn't lie. When that thing fills up with water, the last remaining water sits at the lowest point on my field. And I will tell you that all those new drains and catch basins is not going to get rid of that water because their land is high, the water will flow down. The only potential benefit is a bit of a what do they call that here? A cutoff benefit, where it's going to stop the water. This is good stuff. Anyway, so the water is going to make its way to that low point. Okay, hopefully those drains will maybe catch a little bit, but the water's on its way past. It's heading to my property, okay? So their water flows onto my property from the Jananna property, creating damage, therefore should be assessed a greater portion of my outlet liability. Mine's at $17,478, theirs is $8,957. The proposed catch basins will do nothing to remove water from my field. The closed nature of the system will do nothing to capture any peripheral water. As a result, the entire system will serve no benefit to me whatsoever. Instead, this work will be damaging lands and crops unnecessarily, preventing access to the southwest corner of my field, taking away land away for my future use or other things I feel I want to use it for with no compensation. And Jananna should be assessed a greater portion, $9,278 of benefit of the East Branch. The only benefit I see, like I said, is a cutoff benefit where hopefully those catch basins will catch a bit of water on the way by. Okay? Next slide.
Mr. Kiddo, if I could, we've gone on 20 minutes now. So procedurally, we've certainly exceeded the timing here. What is the committee inclined to do at this point? Do we want to continue?
You know what? I only have a few more slides. I think I've made my main points.
All right. If you want to summarize and wrap it up, and then
listen. I didn't know there was a time. I thought this was different than the last meeting where we get the clock in the 7 minutes.
Go ahead.
I thought we had some time.
Go ahead.
Okay. Anyway, so my proof is in history. If you go back in time and you look at all the pictures, you can always see this lake that's always formed in my fields, and some of that obviously has come from my property, but a lot of it has come from the Jananna property. Let's keep going back in time here, okay? There we go. That's what we got here. The first one was 2010. Or no, that was, let me see my order here. Oh, that was 2010. This one's 2014. Next one is 2018. And then here's the proof, okay? Once that systematic tiling was put in, the water stopped, okay? Next slide. All right, as soon as that tiling was put in, that water stopped coming over, okay? That shows you where the water was coming from, okay? It fills up in the spring, you never see a speck of water anymore because of all that systematic tiling. Great job, the tiling did what it was supposed to do. It's working, but that shows you where the water's coming from. It was coming onto my property from their property. Next slide. These are more current images, right? If it was coming all from my property, that would be a lake still. Anyway, next slide. I'm just going to wrap this up here. I did propose fixing all this, and no one wanted to talk to me. No one wanted anything to do with me. Next slide. That's what I was willing to spend to fix it all. Would have did it all. $15,839. I have quotes. I got pricing. That's what it would have cost to fix the whole east side. Probably getting a drain in the ground that the creek didn't have to be dug down. The contractors assured me that could be done. And I feel my assessment should absolutely not exceed that amount because that's what I was willing to spend. I offered to pay for it all. Okay? I got turned down. No one wanted to talk to me. I feel that's what I was willing to do. I thought my offer, which I agreed to pay for, I feel it was reasonable, it was generous, and would have resolved the supposed issues. It's designed very close to the engineer's plans, other than not using concrete tile. The sizing is all the same. My offer was rejected. Because of this, my total assessment should not exceed $15,839. Listen, if Jananna want to pay for something above and beyond this, they absolutely can, but then they can pay for it themselves. Okay, that's it. That's all I got to say. Thank you. Thank you. I didn't know there was a time limit.
That's all right. Committee, are there any questions for Mr. Kittle? Seeing none. Okay, thank you. All right. No questions from any of the members of committee at this point, so what we'll do is we'll be circling back response to the appellants and Court of Revision members' questions and comments, so we'll call upon again Mr. Stephen Brickman to respond.
I really don't have any more response other than just explaining basically how we work through the assessments and that sort of thing. So I know how the assessments were done.
Are there any questions of the committee for Mr. Brickman? Yeah.
So in your report, you talked about encompassing the entire drainage area and all the lands that were and property owners. Why were the other property owners upstream from the Bamberg Creek not included in dividing up the cost?
Yeah, so we focus on the liable lands. So the lands upstream in Bamberg Creek were not liable. They're not liable for these construction costs. These you have to assess out the cost of the work that we're working on, right? Only the liable watershed is actually responsible for those costs. This watershed is liable because this is the drainage system that's required in order to drain these lands. Upstream lands don't require additional drainage because they've already got their riparian right basically going upstream.
Any follow-ups to that?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, the water coming from upstream, is that not affecting the drainage problems?
Sorry, if I may. If the water from upstream was causing some kind of flooding in and around Bamberg Creek or something like that, there would be a liability for them. Throughout the entire process, the main comments have been that there has not been flooding in the Bamberg Creek area. So the capacity of the creek is not the issue, it's the elevation of the creek. It needs to be lower.
Councillor Cressman?
Yes, I should have asked you this previously. I understand less government grants, less allowances. Where's that money come from? From the province as well, or where does that? I'm trying to figure out who's ponying up that money.
The government grants come from the Ontario government. OMAFRA administers that program. Yep.
But the additional column that talks about less allowances, is that internal money that others pay, or is that also sourced from the government?
No, that's not sourced from the government.
Okay.
That portion of the allowances is grantable. Like, they contribute their portion. The government contributes their portion, but the entire amount is not funded by the government. No.
Maybe I'm asking this. I see the net amount. So if we work our way across, we have the total assessment. Let's take the Schneider property on, where do we want to go on? On Bamberg Creek, let's keep it simple. I've got to get my glasses on.
Yeah, so the Schneider property on Bamberg Creek, there's a benefit assessment of 12,500, an outlet liability of 1,933. We're on
Yep.
the same line? Okay. And then there's a total assessment, which is the sum of those columns before it, of 14,433.
Correct?
Then there's a government grant, 4,811. That represents 1/3 of the total.
Yep.
Okay. And then there's a $4,030 allowance as well.
So where's that allowance, the $4,030? Where's that sourced from? That's my question.
It's a project cost. So just like the construction cost, it's a project cost. It's sourced from the liable watershed area.
Okay, so the other landowners it's kind of a pool of money that's generated from the contributions of others and is applied to this property?
Yeah, so it's a project cost. So for instance, damage allowances for constructing the system, there would be crop losses. That landowner needs to be compensated for the crop losses which occur during construction,
Yes.
and that's one of the allowance categories. Yep.
So it's an internally generated pool of money by the other landowners?
Yeah, just like construction
Yeah.
costs or anything like
Yeah,
that. Yep.
okay, that was exactly
Yep.
my question. Thank you very much.
Any other additional questions? Nope, okay. That's a good question. We need a motion? Okay. I've been informed for purposes of procedure, we will need a motion to allow questions above and beyond presentations. So is there a member of the committee that would want to put forward that motion? Okay, seconded. Perfect. All in favor? That passes. Yes, Mr. Kittle.
Okay, I'm getting the feeling you don't want questions, and that's fine. My
Er-
one question though,
We just allowed it.
well, we were talking about allowances, and I'm glad we drilled into it. Yeah, it's just another big pool of money that comes from our pockets outside, like you got construction costs, and you got allowances. So now we gotta, as a group, kind of feed each other money, right? And so one of the big ones, if you look at all the allowance numbers, is this loss of access. So when they never had access to begin with, why are we paying them for a loss of access when they never had access? Sometimes there's no bridge, there's nothing being taken away. We're feeding and other landowners access money when they never had access to begin, nothing's changing.
I'm not quite sure I follow your question.
Okay.
Mr. Brickman, do you have a response to that?
If the question is why are we using loss of access? Is that the question?
No, let me rephrase it.
Go ahead.
Okay, there is something called allowance, we've talked about.
Yes.
Where you pay other landowners for various things. If the drainage works takes away access to a piece of your land, maybe you had a bridge, or maybe there was something there that you needed to get over to your land, and the drainage works is going to take that away. Okay, then that person who got their bridge taken away gets an allowance, like we all pay because now you lost access, right? But some of these people that are getting access money, they never had access to begin with. So we're not really taking away access because they never had access. So why are we paying them for a loss of access? And it's significant, like those allowances are huge.
Okay. I believe Mr. Brickman can answer your question.
Does that make sense? I hope.
I believe there was a question there at the end, yeah.
If I had a whiteboard, I could draw it.
We'll give Mr. Brickman a moment to find.
Yeah, just one second. I'm looking in the answer.
He's looking up
Here.
the answer for you here. Just a moment.
So Section 18 of the Act, basically, so it's subject to Section 33 of the Act, the engineer in the report shall provide for the construction, replacement, enlargement, or improvement of bridges, culverts, pumping stations, water gates, and these other stuff. So basically, the engineer is required to provide access when a drainage system, a municipal drainage system, is going to cause a piece of land to be severed, subject to Section 33. And 33 is for loss of access. And loss of access allowance is for land. So the drainage system is like a municipal drainage system, even though there is a Bamberg Creek there. The municipal drainage system, like the new status to the system, is causing a severance of lands. And that land needs to be either there needs to be a construction, like the construction of a crossing, put into the report, or a loss of access allowance can be provided. And that loss of access allowance can be calculated in one of two ways. The first way is you provide the landowner with the money that it would cost to construct their own bridge, or you compensate the landowner for the land which is severed, whichever is cheaper. So it's a requirement in the Act that the engineer basically account for crossings if crossings are necessary, or if subject to Section 33, a loss of access can be provided in lieu, and that's the way it's calculated.
Okay. At that point, I believe we're done. What we're going to do is the committee will be retiring to deliberate, and we will return to present the resolutions based on the appeals here. So, all right, we'll allow the question. Go ahead.
So what are the next steps? Who makes the decision?
So, excellent. So the next step is exactly this. So this committee, in addition to the drainage superintendent, the clerks that are involved in the committee, we will be retiring to deliberate. We will do so in closed session below here. What we'll be doing is any changes the court wishes to be made to the assessments, the court can request that the engineer amend the schedule to comply. So if there are any comments from the assessed owner present that is affected by the change proposed by the court. So we'll get to that. What we're going to do is we're going to deliberate, we'll discuss, take into account the information we've received, and we will return once we are done deliberating. I won't give you a time on that because I don't know how long our conversation will be. But until then, we are in recess while we deliberate.
This is not a closed session.
Oh, sorry. And I should rephrase that. It is not a closed session, but we can deliberate behind closed doors, so we will be doing so. Thank you. Yes. I believe we'd have to go back to the committee to. Is the committee willing to hear one more? This would be from the actual petitioner. Yes. Can I get a mover and a seconder? All in favor? Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Wilkinson. I just want to clarify that we are not just looking at 2 acres. Now today, it's actually said that it's 1 acre. As an opposing party has indicated several times. Just to avoid tunnel vision here, we're looking at our entire property being affected. I recall once of our councillor representatives at the first meeting asked a question to our engineer, Steve Berkman, essentially saying this proposed plan so accurately presented and questionable. Why the resistance? I'm asking the same question, Mayor Wilkinson. Allow me to say this. It is unfortunate that the parties, whether involved or not, I believe have been grossly misinformed and thus not understanding the full plan of the engineer's plan. And despite the unfortunate resistance, however, we are still optimistic and will continue to trust and lean on the expertise of the professional engineers with headway Through the Drainage Act, we believe and hope that the council will decipher and perceive the truth. The areas affected are well over 2 acres. I'm not going to say how many acres, but it's the entire property. As we said, the east, down the middle, the west. East is more significant, yes. But again, we will continue to trust and lean on the expertise of the professional engineers with headway through Drainage Act. We believe and hope that the council will decipher the truth. I'm repeating this. And we're optimistic and looking forward to the Wilmot Township Council to implement the Drainage Act, to approve the proposed Bamberg Creek, Jananna, and Council Crook. Sorry, I'm pronouncing this wrong. Jananna and Koch-Leis Municipal Drain 2003 plan. And again, you'll appreciate the sense of value that we have in maintaining the bearable land. I believe that all participants will benefit in 3 ways. The value of the land will go up, whether they realize it or not. The drainage system will improve and make the land more workable. Ultimately, once again, raises the value of the land and profit for workable farmland. Again, Mayor Wilkinson, I want to thank you and all the councilors, and I appreciate all your time. I really do. Thank you.
You're welcome. And for the record, I'm not mayor, just chair of this particular meeting. At this point, we're not going to accept any more comments, any more questions. I believe we've heard everything we need to hear. And just to remind everyone in attendance, we're not here to change the plan, not here to interpret the engineer's plan. We're simply here to discuss the assessments. I appreciate everybody's contributions. We are in recess to deliberate. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. The Court of Revision, we are back in session. So, thank you for your patience, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to sort of stumble through some of the procedural stuff. My apologies on that. Nonetheless, I want to recognize that this evening there are parties in all camps present, and I do thank everybody for your time and your appeals. At the conclusion of this Court of Revision, every appellant to the engineer's assessment will receive a letter from the Deputy Clerk of the Township of Wilmot, that is Chad Curtis. And I would like to remind everyone that any party to an appeal before the Court of Revision may appeal to the Drainage Tribunal by giving notice addressed to the Clerk of the Tribunal, given to the Clerk of the initiating municipality, which in this case is the Township of Wilmot, from the decision of the Court of Revision or from its omission, neglect, or refusal to hear or decide an appeal within 21 days of the pronouncement of the decision of the Court of Revision or of any matter evidencing such omission, neglect, or refusal. I will now read the recommendation of the Court of Revision, and it is recommended that the assessment contained in the engineer's report be upheld. Do we have a mover? Moved by Councillor Cressman. And do we have a seconder? Moved by Councillor Herget. Thank you. All in favor? And that carries unanimously. I will now read a motion to adjourn. So it is recommended that the Court of Revision for the Bamberg Creek, Jananna, and Koch-Leis Municipal Drain 2023 adjourn. May I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Herget and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Cressman. All in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thank you.